You woke up last night, somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning, your eyes opened, your mind surfaced, and for a few minutes, or maybe longer, you lay there in the dark, awake. Not fully, not sharply, something softer than that, a strange, warm clarity, like the surface of a lake before dawn. And then the anxiety hit. Why am I awake? What is wrong with me? How many hours until the alarm? You checked your phone, the light burned your eyes. You did the math. You told yourself to fall back asleep, and you could not right away, and when you finally did, the alarm went off, and the day started already broken. Here is the thing nobody told you, that waking was not a malfunction. It was your body remembering something your culture spent 140 years teaching you to forget. Because before roughly 1880, human beings did not sleep the way you sleep. Not in Europe, not in Asia, not in Africa, not anywhere that has been studied with any seriousness. The idea that a person should lie down once, fall asleep quickly, stay unconscious for 7 or 8 unbroken hours, and then be jolted awake by an alarm. That idea is not ancient, it is not natural, it is not biological, it is industrial. And the story of how it was installed in the human animal is one of the strangest and least examined transitions in modern history. I'm Julian Crane, an archaeologist the establishment pushed out when I started asking the questions my colleagues wouldn't. So on this channel I dig up the history they left out. If that's the sort of thing you want more of, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get into the scary reason they changed how every human being on Earth sleeps after 1880. Start with what we lost, because what we lost has a name, and once you know it, you hear it everywhere in the old record, hiding in plain sight. First sleep, second sleep. 2 phrases that appear in more than 500 surviving documents, running from Homer's Odyssey in the 8th century before Christ, all the way through medical texts, court depositions, diaries, novels, and prayer manuals, across every century of recorded Western history. First sleep and second sleep. 2 separate phases of rest, divided by a stretch of wakefulness in the middle of the night that was so universal, so unremarkable, so ordinary, that writers mentioned it the way you would mention breakfast, without explanation, without context, because everyone already knew what it meant. A historian named Roger Eckerch at Virginia Tech spent 16 years pulling that thread. 16 years in archives across Europe and North America, working through legal records, private letters, literature, and medical writing, before he published what he found. And what he found was not a curiosity. It was a civilizational pattern. For as far back as the documents go, people went to bed shortly after dark, slept for roughly 4 hours, woke naturally around midnight, spent 1 to 2 hours in a state of calm wakefulness, and then drifted into a second sleep that carried them to morning. The period between the 2 sleeps was not empty. It was not restless, it was not insomnia. By every surviving account, it was closer to the opposite. People described it as a time of unusual calm. They prayed. They turned over their dreams, which were reported as extraordinarily vivid at that hour, more vivid than anything recalled in the morning. They talked in low voices with the person beside them. They made love. A 16th century French physician noted that labourers were more fertile because they came together after the first sleep, once the exhaustion of the day had lifted and there was more enjoyment in it. Scholars and poets worked in the interval, others simply lay in the dark and thought. And the specificity in the record is what makes it impossible to wave away. This is not a handful of poetic references that could mean anything. There were prayer manuals that laid out particular devotions for the wakeful hour between the sleeps, on the assumption that every reader would be awake then and looking for something to do with the time. There were physicians who advised sleeping the first sleep on the right side and the second on the left as ordinary medical guidance. Chaucer refers to the first sleep, so does Cervantes. So do English court records, where a witness places an event at the time after his first sleep, and no clerk feels any need to explain the phrase to the court. The references are not exotic, they are domestic. They sit in the writing the way any shared, obvious fact of daily life sits in the writing, mentioned in passing and never defined, because there was nothing to define. Everyone woke in the middle of the night, everyone knew what the interval was for. It was as unremarkable to them as the fact that the sun comes up. I want to stop here and ask something that almost never gets asked. What does it actually feel like to lie awake in total darkness with no anxiety about being awake? Not checking a clock, not calculating the hours you are losing, not treating your own consciousness as a problem to solve, just awake, in the dark, with nothing to do and nowhere to be, and no machine that is going to scream at you in 4 hours. I am not making a mystical claim here. I am asking a practical question because we actually have the answer, and the answer is chemical. In the early 1990s, a psychiatrist named Thomas Ware at the National Institute of Mental Health ran an experiment that would overturn what we thought we knew about human sleep. He took a group of healthy volunteers and stripped every source of artificial light out of their world. For a full month, they lived on 10 hours of light and 14 hours of darkness a day, roughly the natural rhythm of a long winter night in the world before electricity. For the first few weeks, they slept enormously, around 11 hours a night, as if their bodies were repaying a debt they had not known they were carrying. And then, around the 4th week, something happened that Ware had not predicted. The subjects began sleeping in 2 distinct phases. 4 hours of deep sleep, then 1 to 2 hours of calm wakefulness, then 4 more hours of sleep. Nobody instructed them to, nobody suggested it. They had no knowledge of Ekirch's historical research, which had not even been published yet. Their bodies simply did it, as if the pattern had been there the whole time, suppressed but not erased, waiting in the wiring of the human nervous system for the lights to finally go out. But here is what stopped the researchers cold. During that waking interval, the subjects' brains were producing elevated levels of prolactin. Prolactin is a hormone associated with deep calm, with the peaceful alertness of meditation, with the contentment that follows love-making, with the state that lets a nursing mother sit still and quiet for long stretches without restlessness. The subjects were not just awake between their sleeps, they were in an altered state of consciousness. Weir described it as resembling a meditative state, unlike anything seen in ordinary waking life. Not asleep, not awake the way we understand waking. Something else, something in between, and the pattern repeats with unsettling precision. A historian finds 500 references to a universal sleep practice. A neuroscientist, working completely independently, recreates the conditions in a laboratory, and the practice comes back on its own, dragging with it a brain chemistry that modern people simply never experience, because modern people never spend enough time in darkness for it to switch on. This raises a simple but critical question. What did we used to know, in that state, that we no longer even know we have forgotten? Now let us talk about what killed it, because it did not die on its own. In 1879, Thomas Edison demonstrated the first commercially viable incandescent light bulb, and within a decade, electric light was tearing through the cities of America and Europe. Streets that had gone black after sunset were lit. Factories that had closed at dusk could now run through the night. Homes that had organized their evenings around candlelight and the hearth could now push their waking hours deep into the territory that had always belonged to the first sleep. And Edison was explicit about what he thought of sleep. He considered it a waste of time, a relic of human laziness and inefficiency that technology would eventually stamp out. He claimed to sleep only 3 or 4 hours a night and mocked anyone who needed more. He predicted that in the future humans would not sleep at all. The prediction was absurd, but the ideology under it was not. It was the pure distilled logic of the Industrial Revolution. Every hour spent sleeping was an hour not spent producing. Every hour spent in darkness was an hour not spent consuming. And that midnight interval, that prolactin-soaked hour of reflection and dreaming and prayer, was an hour that belonged to no employer, no market, and no institution. It was private in a way the industrial economy simply could not tolerate. Think about what that hour actually was, from the point of view of a system that measures everything by output. It was a stretch of time, every night, in every household, when a human being was awake, alert, calm, and completely unproductive. Not sleeping, so not even resting in the way a machine rests, just present, thinking, praying, talking to the person beside them, unreachable by any employer and unsellable to any market. In a world that was busy converting every hour of human life into either labor or consumption, the wakeful interval was the 1 hour that resisted conversion. You could not put a worker on a night shift and still leave them that hour. You could not sell them anything in it. You could not measure it, tax it, or improve it. From the standpoint of the factory, it was pure waste, a hole in the productive day that had to be closed. And electric light was the tool that closed it. Look at the timeline, because the timeline tells the story. Gas street lamps had already begun eating into the darkness of European cities from the early 1800s. The whaling industry, driven in large part by the demand for lamp oil, had been pushing artificial light into the evening for a century before that. But electric light was different in kind. It did not flicker. It did not run out. It did not need tending. It filled a room with a constancy that wiped out the rhythms of flame and shadow that had governed human nights for thousands of years. And with that constancy came a new possibility that had never existed before. The entire night could be colonized. The deeper I went into the records, the more I found the transition documented in real time. References to first sleep and second sleep, which had been everywhere for centuries, begin to thin out in the late 1800s. By the early 1900s, they have nearly vanished. Medical writing that had treated the midnight waking as ordinary begins to reframe it as a symptom, a disorder, something to be treated. By the middle of the 20th century, segmented sleep had been so thoroughly scrubbed from cultural memory that when Eckhart finally published his research, most sleep scientists had never heard of it. A practice that had been universal for as long as humans had been human was deleted from the record in less than 100 years. The silence was deafening, and the deletion was not passive. Something had to actively teach people that the interval was a defect, and medicine was the instrument. Once the single unbroken block became the official standard of healthy sleep, the ancient waking that had always sat in the middle of the night suddenly had a diagnosis waiting for it. It got a clinical name, it got a place in the manuals. It became a condition to be corrected rather than an experience to be had. And the moment it became a condition, it became a market. A person who wakes at 2 in the morning and believes their body is working correctly needs nothing. A person who wakes at 2 in the morning and believes their body is malfunctioning needs a product. The same interval of calm wakefulness that a medieval labourer treated as ordinary is sold back to the modern one as a disorder and then medicated. The rhythm did not change. Only the story we tell about the rhythm changed, and the new story had something to sell. Now count the consequences, because the consequences are not historical. They are happening inside your body right now. The single most common form of insomnia in the industrialized world is middle-of-the-night insomnia. Millions of people wake in the small hours, lie in the dark in rising panic, and either medicate themselves back under or drag through the next day in a fog. It is the most frequently reported sleep complaint in modern medicine, and the treatment is almost always a drug. Sedatives, hypnotics, chemicals designed to push the brain back below the surface and hold it there. But what if it is not a disorder at all? What if the people waking at 2 in the morning are not broken? What if their bodies are doing exactly what human bodies have always done, surfacing between two sleeps the way they did for thousands of years, reaching for that interval of calm, that prolactin state, that meditative space between waking and dream, and finding instead a glowing phone, a ticking clock, and the crushing knowledge that the alarm goes off at 6 and they are failing at sleep? Weir himself wrote that when modern people find their sleep broken by a stretch of wakefulness, they regard it as disordered. And he offered another explanation, that a natural human pattern is breaking through into an artificial world in which it seems unfamiliar and unwelcome. Consider what that interval actually contained. Not just rest, not just reflection, access to a chemical state the modern brain almost never enters. Prolactin high, at levels tied to deep calm and heightened creativity. Cortisol, the stress hormone, at its lowest ebb. Dreams still vivid enough to be examined and turned over before the conscious mind had fully reassembled its filters. This was the hour when poets wrote, when prayers felt answered, when the wall between the conscious and the unconscious was thinnest, and the mind could wander without purpose and without judgment, into places that daylight thinking can never reach. And it was replaced. It was replaced by consolidated sleep. 7 hours of unconsciousness compressed into a single unbroken block, bookended by electric light on one end and an alarm clock on the other. A system designed not for the human body, but for the factory shift, for the office schedule, for a world that needed its workers unconscious for a predictable stretch and then fully operational the instant the whistle blew. And notice what the trade actually costs, because it is not just an hour of quiet. The old rhythm handed every person, every night, a doorway into their own mind at the exact moment the doorway is widest. Dreams still warm and legible. The critical, filtering daylight part of the brain still half offline. Stress chemistry at its lowest point of the whole cycle. That is the state in which a problem you could not crack at your desk resolves itself, in which a grief finally moves, in which a line of a poem or the answer to a question arrives from nowhere. It was not a mystical gift. It was a nightly, reliable feature of the human machine, available to a farmer and a king alike. Consolidated sleep does not just compress the hours, it skips the doorway entirely, carrying you from exhaustion straight to the alarm, with no stop in between. We did not merely lose an hour of rest. We lost the 1 hour every single night in which we were most fully ourselves. And the pattern repeats across every domain I have looked at. Systems that once synchronized human beings with natural rhythms, with the body, with the dark, with the cycles of light and rest the species evolved inside of, replaced by systems that synchronize human beings with institutions instead. The calendar replaced the moon, the clock replaced the sun, and consolidated sleep replaced the ancient rhythm that had given every human being, every single night, free access to a state of consciousness that we now treat as a medical problem to be medicated away. I do not have a complete theory. What I have is a question that gets louder the deeper I look. Why did a practice documented on every continent, confirmed in the laboratory, embedded in the very chemistry of the human brain, present in everything from Homer to Dickens, get erased from cultural memory in a single century? Why did the most intimate rhythm of human biology, the way we experience the night itself, get restructured to serve the needs of an economy rather than the needs of a body? And why does almost no one ever ask why we sleep the way we do, as if this way were the only way there had ever been? I am Julian Crane, and I will leave you with this. Tonight, or some night soon, you are going to wake at 2 or 3 in the morning. Your eyes will open, the dark will be there. And for a moment, before the anxiety arrives, before you reach for the phone, before you start counting the hours you have left, there will be something else, something quiet, something your body knows even though your mind has been taught to forget it, a calm that seems to come from nowhere, a stillness that does not match the panic you have been trained to feel. That is the interval, that is the space between the first sleep and the second. That is the door your ancestors walked through every night for 10,000 years, into a room where the mind was quiet and the chemistry was soft and the dark was not an enemy but a country they lived in for an hour or two before the second sleep carried them down to morning. The door is still there. Your body still opens it every night. You have just been taught to be afraid of the room on the other side. So the next time it opens, do not reach for the light. Stay a while and see what your ancestors knew that you were made to forget. I'll see you in the next one.